You're listening to Yoked, Conversations with Real-Life Yogis. I'm Kelly Sunrose, your host. The mission of this podcast is to share the teachings of yoga as applied to everyday life by real people through interviews, conversations, Q&A sessions, and more. Learn more at yogic.podcast.com. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here for today's episode of Yoked. I am seriously out of control excited to share this episode with you. My guest, Dionne Elizabeth, is a longtime internet friend of mine. She and I became friends before social media, when we were blogging about yoga and our art, just making things and putting them out there. Anyway, I've watched her grow and evolve, and I am simply thrilled to share her voice on this podcast. Thank you so much, Dionne. And thank you all for listening. A little more about Dionne. Based between the UK and Norway, Dionne is a creative coach, yoga and meditation teacher, DJ, writer, space-making event maker, but above all, she's a human being that loves life, good vibes, and feelings. She also loves movement, memes, music, food, words, self-care, color, creating spaces that didn't exist before, cultivating community, collecting inspiration, explorations, and adventures. Dionne runs community events, retreats, and experiences in both the UK and Norway and beyond, as well as working one-to-one with creative coaching clients all over the world. You can find out more about Dionne at her website, dionne.space, which you can find a link to over in the show notes at yogic.podcast.com. Couple of bits of news before we jump into this conversation. Most of the archived practice podcasts have migrated to our online community, the Wildcat Yoga Club. So if you want to practice together, head on over there. New practices will continue to post even while I am on something of a maternity leave. Registration is now open for our next immersion, the Cosmic Breath. A pranayama immersion will run from November 1st through December 21st of 2017. This is a deep dive into the breath. In this immersion, we'll study experiential anatomy and physiology of breathing, intermediate pranayama techniques, developing a daily pranayama practice with skill and curiosity. We have some early bird pricing, which runs through August 8th. You can learn more by following the link in the show notes. Our 150-hour advanced teacher training will run from March 2018 through June 2019. All of the details, the application is up on my main site at sunroseyoga.com. Check it out. Finally, every month I donate 15% of my income to organizations and funds that align with the mission and values of my work here. For June, any purchases made in the Sunrose Yoga Shop, the Wildcat Yoga Club, and all other classes will support two organizations, One Girl Can and the Global Justice Ecology Project. You can learn more about the organizations, about this project, and past recipients of funds by following the link in the show notes over at yogic.podcast.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I am so excited to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be on the show. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. So let's just begin by talking about how you found yoga, or how yoga found you.
That's such a good question. I didn't really plan to be interested in yoga. I didn't really know much about it. The way I found yoga is through struggling with anxiety. I had a lot of anxiety in my teens, and I think I was around 19, and I think a doctor actually recommended, which is quite amazing, recommended that I go to a class, and I ended up going to a class at a local gym. And I was going to a gym because I had a lot of issues around eating and had an eating disorder. And so I was going to the gym to kind of work out, and I thought, yoga, what is this thing? I don't know much about it. And is it for me? I never really saw anyone who looked like me in these yoga classes. And I went, and part of my anxiety meant that I couldn't sleep very much. I really struggled with insomnia. So I remember going to class, and it was a really slow class. It was very internal, a lot of meditation and a lot of very kind of restorative postures. Mm-hmm. And at the end of class, I fell asleep, and it was like the first time I was able to naturally go to sleep in such a long time that when I came out, I thought, gosh, there must be something in this. It's amazing. And after that, I went sporadically to this class. I think it was a weekly class, something like that. But then I moved away from where I was living and went to university. I was a mature student. So I moved to a place quite far away. And I guess over the next decade or so, I'm living in a place, I'm back there now. It's a place called Brighton. It's by the sea. And it's got a bit of a reputation as being this kind of very, I don't even want to use the labels because I'm kind of cringing about it. But do you know what I mean? They call it like, they used to call it like the San Francisco of England, but it's definitely not. And they often like to call it like the Portland of England. And I don't think it is. It's like a small provincial town, and I guess there are a few it's quite a large alternative community, quote unquote. So there's a fair amount of yoga down here, a fair few styles. And so at university, I was able to kind of experiment and just try lots of different types. Nothing really stuck. Nothing really resonated that sort of kept me going back and kept me that committed until my late 20s. And you probably know I moved around quite a lot and moved countries and places. But yeah, I eventually moved back here and started going to a local studio regularly. And I was going there for a few years, and, like so many other yoga teachers, getting that question from your teacher who says, I think you should go, you thought about doing teacher training, and immediately just rejecting that and thinking, no, there's no way. I can't imagine myself as a teacher, like bonkers, the idea of it. But he planted something, and I thought about it for a while, and I was working in kind of quite stressful roles and stressful industries. And I thought, well, what about just doing it for myself and just, doing it to learn more and go deeper? So I did. And I've gone on a waffle, but that's essentially it condensed.
And so when you decided to, undertake the project of becoming or going through teacher training for you, what was the program like? What was its focus or emphasis?
Well, I'm trying to pick my words here, but it was an Ashtanga lineage, and I've got no problems with Ashtanga at all. But so I guess an 8-limb approach, and you're sort of, I don't want to call it like your standard 200-hour, but kind of, it was what it was. So anatomy, philosophy, some Sanskrit, some tests, and some teaching practice. And I appreciate it for what it was.
And was your practice were you practicing Ashtanga at that time?
no. And the training wasn't specifically Ashtanga, but the teachers who were running the program were sort of from that lineage, and one of them I think was she actually did Bikram training as well. I think she's gone on to do Jivamukti and all kinds, but so it wasn't one particular lineage or strain, and I appreciated that, because part of my training, and I think for me it was one of the best parts of my training, was just going to do a lot of research and exploration with lots of different types of yoga styles. And that's really where I kind of got excited, because then I felt more free, and there was just a lot of value in that. Like, you always learn something, don't you, going to a class or doing any kind of training. So that was definitely the best part of the teacher training.
And what was pulling you in during that time?
I guess I always think about how I found yoga and my first experiences, and it was that sort of the quietness, or the possibility of becoming still and going kind of deep. And it definitely wasn't the physical, which is why I kind of laugh when I think about my first teacher training, because like studying all the poses and all of the, how you set people up and putting together sequences, it's great and it's really useful, but I've always kind of been drawn more towards this sort of, I don't really know what to call it, like the softer, quieter part of it, the more internal side of it. Yeah.
And so after you completed, did you decide to teach right away, or what was the trajectory there?
After I finished my training, I was furious. I couldn't look at a yoga book. I didn't want anything to do with yoga. I was like, stick a fork in me, Kelly. I'm done. Like, absolutely cooked, I
love it.
I don't know if other people felt like this, but I just really wasn't interested. And I certainly, I guess, like a lot of people, I remember a lot of people on my course who shared the same sort of anxieties around having to teach, like, or the teaching part of the course, where you have to be observed teaching and teach a group of people. And I was mortified. Just, I'm not that kind of person. I don't like being in front of people, or being in front, like a center of attention in a way, or telling people what to do. It was very strange and uncomfortable for me. So after teaching, I just needed to take a break for about 3 months completely. And amazingly, I just started to experiment with like a home practice that was super minimal. Like, I know it's not about duration or what you do in your home practice, but it was just very tiny amounts of yoga that I incorporated into my day. And I wasn't following any rules or guidance with it. I just sort of let it be quite playful. And not a few months later, maybe about a year afterwards, I moved to Norway and started teaching, which is kind of bonkers, really. So no, I didn't intend to, but it kind of happened.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like so much of what happens in a 200-hour training is, for many people, that's sort of the first dipping of the toe into that deep self-study. And so there's an unraveling, in a certain sense, of like our concept of self. And then the flip side of it is, ostensibly the purpose is to then be teaching other people. And those two things seem very much at odds in the moment where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here, and everything, totally. I don't even understand everything that I thought was real up until this point. And now I'm supposed to stand in front of the room and like tell people where to put their bodies.
Absolutely agree.
So I feel like it's such that period of integration afterwards where you're just kind of like, okay, all this happened. Now, how is it going to sort itself out? Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
Unraveling is a really good word. Sorry. Yeah. With you.
And so then how did you wind up in Norway?
Well, that's a good question as well. I kind of dragged my partner back to his homeland. He's Norwegian. He didn't want to go, but I felt it was important to, get immersed in his culture, hopefully learn the language and just throw myself into it. And I felt ready for a change. I guess I have that kind of personality that's quite, I know this word's a bit overused, so I'm cringing a little bit as I say it, but it's quite nomadic. I've moved around quite a lot in my life and I tend to get quite restless, and there's about 2.5 years and then I start feeling like, where's next? With kind of seeking feeling. So yeah, it just felt time, and I really wanted to have a change as well, as my job was pretty intense. It was really intense. And
what were you doing work-wise at that time?
I was working in radio, which I loved. Had a great boss, and I guess I remember having a meeting with him not long before I left, and he was kind of joking like, oh, you're doing the jobs of 7 people. And he kind of laughed, and I was like, God, no wonder I'm so knackered and stressed, But it was quite an intense role because there were many different hats that I was wearing. I loved it, but I just felt I really needed to take a step back and do something else. So
And where did you go in Norway?
I went to the west coast, Bergen, Europe's rainiest city. I think they won a record yesterday for I think it was the longest period of rain on record since 1912 or something ridiculous, like almost a month's worth of rain consecutively. But anyway, I guess that's sort of, you're in Portland, aren't you?
Yes, and we had the rainiest winter on record this year. There was one month where we got it was I didn't keep track of the specifics, but we had a really rainy winter this year too, and it is quite rainy generally.
Do you deal well with the rain? Like your
It's funny. I feel like now I do. I moved here when I was 21 and lived here for 4 years. And then I needed a break. Like my husband and I moved to Denver, Colorado from here only because it is sunny 300 days a year.
Amazing. And how did you get on? How did you manage that change?
I loved the sun, but I realized how much, it's quite different culturally. And so then we knew we were going to make our way back. And I spent 3 or 4 years in Seattle. And now we've been back in Portland for 7 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And and
that's
it's
good
funny.
Going.
There are times in the year where the actual winter is usually fine for me, but because the rainy season generally lasts until about July 4th, June is usually my hardest month where I'm like, it should be over by
I'm so do you know what constitution are you?
I'm primarily Vata, but I also have some Pitta in there. But there's a dampness there that's very much cold and to me.
To the bone. Yeah, I relate. I so relate.
Yeah. How about you? What is your constitution?
I'm Vata mostly. Yeah,
I wondered when you were talking about moving around, because I know those impulses. And
yeah, it's so interesting, fascinating.
Oh, so you land in Bergen, and what happens there?
Yeah, that was a really interesting time. Probably the most difficult period in my life, I think, in my adult life, I think. Um, I was, yeah, I feel really lucky that I had that experience, because it's changed me so much. It's changed me, but it's also maybe reaffirmed who I am to myself. So I know myself better.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you know, with challenges, we often are forced to really confront ourselves. So, yeah, I mean, culturally, it was a massive shock to the system. And I'm brown too, I'm mixed race, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge because, you know, the world kind of sings the praises of Scandinavia so much these days. It's very on trend. However, I think if you're brown, you probably are going to have a different experience. You're going to have a, you know, yeah, a different experience moving through the world anyway. But yeah, it was challenging. And in terms of my yoga life, also was very confrontational. I loved teaching. I was shocked, completely shocked, but I absolutely loved it. Rather, I don't know, often I still feel weird saying teaching, you know, all these years later, but because it's more, for me, I guess it feels more like an experience that you're creating with people. Like it's never going to be the same, of course, you know, and it's like the energy in the room, it's what you're cultivating. It's, yeah, I can't really explain it, but yeah, so it never really felt to me like I was teaching anything. I was just kind of showing up and holding space and seeing what happened and working on, you know, what was being thrown, and yeah, trying to make something out of that. So I loved it. I really loved it. And I started teaching at a university gym kind of place. They have centres all over the city. I mean, it's amazing, like Norway, and the standards that they have for students and for people in general is pretty high. So very amazing facilities. And, you know, if you're Norwegian and you're growing up in Norway, there's a lot of amazing tools and access to stuff that you have, which is beyond anything I've seen anywhere I've lived in the world. So yeah, I felt very, very privileged to experience that, and to hold classes for some amazing people, a lot of young people, but also for staff. And I used to teach a senior group as well. And then a local studio wanted to interview me to start teaching there, which I did. And unfortunately, I think it's sort of, yeah, I'm really trying to, I can just feel myself there, and I'm really trying to select my words, because I'm grateful for my experience in Norway. But unfortunately, my experience in the yoga scene was not positive. It was Norway, at least when I lived there, when I first moved there, it was very much two camps of yoga. You had your Ashtanga folks and you have your Iyengar folks. And I lived on the west coast in Bergen, and Bergen at the time that I lived there was mostly coming out of an Ashtanga phase and moving towards Iyengar. And Oslo was very much going more towards Ashtanga. So being in Bergen, the studio that I got the job at, that was an Iyengar studio. And, you know, I really appreciate that I had a chance to kind of really immerse myself there with studies, like training with different Iyengar teachers. am I even saying that right? I think we had to call them masters or something. I don't know. I'm kind of anti-rules and like hierarchies, but yeah, sorry if I offend anyone, but I'm sorry, I'm unhinged. But yeah, the studio kind of reflected a lot of the challenges of the culture that I'd experienced. There was Norwegian culture, it's quite by the book. It's quite it's very much about following the rules. Everybody's kind of the same. You wear the same stuff, you do the same things on the same day at the same time, and I can see that there's comfort for people in that. It makes them feel, you know, they belong. This is their national identity, and it's a very strong and very celebrated national identity. And, you know, I'm kind of a mix of lots of different things. So I don't know, nationalism for me is kind of problematic. It's quite challenging for me. So there's a lot of flag waving, Norwegian pride going on, which is, you know, I don't really know what that is. You know, I don't know what it is to be born into something like that, but it's definitely fascinating. But yeah, so following the rules, doing things by the book. So therefore the studio kind of echoed that in many ways. That's fair enough. But it was quite, yeah, there was just a lot of issues, a lot of bullying, actually, is what it was. I was kind of, it was decided that I was the person that was the problem. And yeah, there was just a lot of people telling me how wrong I was, what I should be doing, that this is what yoga is and what yoga isn't. And I am apparently what yoga isn't. And yeah, to cut a long story short, after being accused of horrendous things that weren't true, I just thought, I've had enough, and I left and just set out on my own. And I've never really spoken about it because I think I was a new teacher, and kind of the brainwashing of staying silent even if you're in pain was enforced. And the warnings and the threats, it was very scary. And I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want to talk badly of people because that's not yogic. And, you know, even though I could see that it was a dangerous situation and I didn't want other people to have to go through what I did. So yeah, I think it really had a tremendous impact on my teaching career, because I'm quite wary I'm quite nervous about committing to one studio or even teaching at a studio. For that reason, really, I just sort of don't want to be swept up in the drama.
Well, it's so interesting how common that is.
That hurts my heart. It really does.
And how, like, what a paradox that is, or how in opposition to the idea of the practice itself, which is, you know, to actually experience what you're experiencing, rather than just tick through this whole line of, you know, points of alignment or things that are okay to say or feelings that are okay to have and ways of being that are quote unquote yogic. And it's so interesting how, and terrible how that is used to hold people down and suppress them, when it's the exact opposite of, you know, what the teachings are.
Absolutely. And then it becomes so confusing, because then even to try and challenge that idea, you become embroiled in this debate on what is yogic, what is not, you know, and the whole, you know, karma yoga ridiculousness, like being used in the wrong context. Just it was it really, it riles me up, to be honest, because I just feel it's dangerous when there's any kind of form of oppression in something that is supposed to be available to, I don't even like saying supposed to, but that should is another one of those words, but something that can be accessed by people to feel more free, you know. And yeah, it's unfortunate, and also the racism that I experienced as well in those circles, and also still in the yoga community. I mean, it's like these things, that the bullying that people experience, other people experience, and the big issues in yoga that not many people are talking about. It's like we just look away and we ignore what's happening, and sexism as well. And there's a lot of kind of dark stuff that, of course, comes up when there's any kind of power play at work, which is it's unfortunate. Let's dismantle it. Yeah. But yeah.
I know I'm getting like all riled up here.
I'm sorry.
No, don't. I am sorry that happened, and still happens.
I'm sorry that other people have to experience that too. And I feel, as I said, I haven't spoken about this publicly to anyone. I've kind of alluded to certain things or spoken about my passion for dismantling oppression in various forms, in yoga, in the arts, and any kind of snootiness that exists, that means that people can't access stuff that should be available to them. But yeah, I haven't really spoken about it so much. But I think it is important to speak up when you feel you can. Because some people, it's just not possible, and maybe they're not going to be in a place where they feel safe to do that. But I hope that more people can feel encouraged to step away from situations where they don't feel safe, situations that are dangerous or that are making them feel less in any way, in whatever workplace you're in, you know, and life situation, actually.
I mean, I just, like, anytime it's that stick to the script, do what sells, there's such potential for abuse on, you know, in many different ways, and of different you know, people who are relating to whatever it is in different capacities. And
it stifles any kind of creativity and any possibility for something interesting to happen. And I'm not saying that following a lineage is a bad thing at all. If that works for you, great. If you're into gurus and that's working out, do your thing, girl. Is that what they say? I don't know. I'm just the most awkward. But but if, you know, just do what you want to do. Don't feel that claustrophobic sensation of needing to feel or fit or be a certain way. It's so limiting. Let's grow and be big and better and
So where did you go after that?
After that, I randomly, because as well as yoga, I was, as you know, Norway's quite an expensive place to live. So I kind of was teaching still at the gym, I think, 8 different places around the city, and teaching in this studio about 3 days a week, as well as working in a bar, which, by the way, teaching yoga and working in teaching a morning yoga class and working in a bar till 4 a.m. it's probably not the best thing to do. So if anyone is listening that's even considering doing that, just hope you can take heed of that. As well as working in a coffee shop So I was pretty knackered, pretty broke still, struggling to eat, wandering the streets looking for like the equivalent of like, I don't know, just pennies on the floor so I could just get some money together, because I was hungry and exhausted. And I got offered a job. It was very strange and random, but a director got in touch. He was doing this theatre production in the National Theatre in Bergen, and heard that I did work with sound, and I was also doing random DJ events. Like, I guess I've been doing that for around, or I had been doing that for around, I don't even know, very long time. And she was, this director was working on a production in Norway for 3 months and wanted to hire me to be an actress and a sound designer. And it paid very well. So I said, yes, I'll take that. Took a break from the yoga stuff, and had a change, and that was great. But I found that actually my home practice was really starting to develop. So I really kind of went back to the source, I suppose, and tried to remind myself, like, why am I even interested in yoga? Like, what is this relationship? Can I find a way to help me, deal with the traumas that came from the challenges of my teaching career, but also find a way to implement it into everyday life that was sustainable and real, and that didn't need to follow what I'd been told to do before by people that I didn't respect. So that's a bit spicy, isn't it? But it's true. So I went quite deep into my home practice. I had enough money to take like my first trip back to the UK to visit my family, and I did like some yoga workshops, which was great, and started to feel like, oh, okay, there's still something there. I'm still interested in doing this, but actually maybe I'm just going to try and do it on my own. And so I just found that in Norway there's all of these amazing spaces, beautiful spaces that often aren't being used in any way. So I just knocked on doors and asked people if I could just do like a random kind of pop-up, I guess that's the trendy word for it, isn't it? But like to kind of inhabit their space and hold a yoga session in there. And there obviously were a lot of no's, and that's another part of Norwegian culture, like the kind of boundaried, cool, distant interactions when you first meet people. But I just persevered and I kept knocking, and I was just really visioning what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to challenge all of those oppressive ideas about what yoga should be. And I wanted to create and hold space in a way that didn't necessarily have any rules, but was a safe space where people could just come and be. It didn't even need to join in the session. They could just arrive and just be in the space and do what they needed to do, whether that was having a kip, having a sleep for an hour and getting much needed rest, or joining in, or getting really creative and inspired and improvising with stuff. I really wanted to create that space, and I knew it wasn't in a yoga studio because I didn't feel ready to set foot in one. But I also saw that in my work over the years in radio and music and the arts, often just like some sectors of yoga can be like, there was this almost a snootiness, a kind of separateness and a hierarchy of who was allowed to, who was allowed to participate and be in those spaces. And this for me is problematic. I feel that I just wanted to go around and just rip down the barriers and make these things accessible in any way possible, whether it was through offering pay what you can options, or trying to mix up the way that yoga was perceived there's often a stereotype with it. So I wanted to use these random spaces that I just found as I wandered around the city and take them over and create something. I didn't really know what it was going to be. And I didn't know if anyone was going to be interested. But I knew that there would be yoga, there would be movement, there'd be meditation, there would be music and stillness and quietness and a kind of openness and friendliness and space for people to connect with each other. And amazingly, eventually, some spaces opened their doors, and they were mostly like culture houses and museums and galleries, and it was amazing. I mean, amazing spaces. And I still can't believe they let me in, and people showed up, and it was amazing. They were really receptive, really open. Of course, there's still the people who will show up and demand to know what your lineage is, and you know, do you get that? What is that?
Or who people at times people will like point to the description, like, this is supposed to be this. Why are you teaching this?
I'm raising my eyebrows. Wow, yeah. That's interesting. Gosh, it's really fascinating to me. I understand, like, I get it. Mm-hmm. We all want to feel safe, and we kind of want to know, but we don't know anything. You know, that's the beauty of it. I think, you know, the more I know, the less I know. You know. But yeah, essentially, I just started doing these random events, and then that became a more regular kind of community class. And I feel honestly so lucky to have met incredible people during that time that really showed me, like, they really taught me, about the importance of creating your own relationship to this, whatever this is, yoga. It's everything. And yeah, they were so, from the darkness and the challenges and the constant walls I was coming up against in yoga and also in my life in Norway. And these people, like, they were real lights and inspired me to show up. And we had a twice a week gathering, and they were up for doing, you know, the strange stuff. We'd go a bit rogue and take it to the streets, as in just to the park, but just to be in nature and just to hang out and be with each other. And sometimes, you know, again, it's still Norway, and so to a lot of people it was a bit radical what I was doing, which is hilarious, isn't it? Like, just meeting up with people and moving around and I don't know, creating space was radical, but it got a lot of press attention, which again didn't really do me any favors in terms of relationships in the yoga community there. But I don't know, I didn't really care. And so if it meant that people who had never considered yoga, or they had thought to themselves, oh, yoga is this thing and that's it, if that got them curious and to step outside and to try a class, whether it was with me or with anyone, then to me that's really powerful. That's a really amazing action, like really positive thing that can come out of a dark situation. I'm waffling. Waffling on a tangent.
I feel there's something I mean, there's something about this, about the teaching. There's the potential for it to be this, you know, anti-capitalist radical movement, even if you are accepting money for, you know, even if there is an exchange, which I think is important just so both parties feel clear.
Yes.
But this whole notion of trusting that, like, I'm making an offering, it's an experiment. And, even if it's like one person, if that one person gets it and by gets it, I just mean is curious and just ready to try something, like that is where it's all happening. Mm-hmm. And that like really flies in the face of, this other, maybe more visible version of yoga, which is, where people have an idea of exactly what to expect. And the teacher says this every single time. And the room will look in this certain way and will do these things. And, for students, they can expect a certain thing, and teachers can expect a certain experience, and studios then can expect a certain experience. And when you deviate from that, even if the deviation is, even if you wind up in the same place, basically,
in
Shavasana or in that space, it's like you've really made some waves and also like opened up everybody's worlds, including your own. But it's such an interesting, it's just so like fascinating how these, at least in the United States, I often talk about it as sort of like there are two yoga industries in a sense. There is the business as usual, we're doing everything that everyone expects. And then there is this other realm. And frequently I feel like there's just not really any intersection. And I don't know, for me, once I became okay with whatever happens being enough, like I stopped like really even thinking about the other realm. I don't know, sorry, I waffled a lot. No, on a big tangent there.
Give me all your waffles. I love it. It's really fascinating. I have nothing against, the kind of formulaic, the business as usual, the very clear, like this is what it is. It's a very well-oiled machine, does very well at business because it kind of knows it's whatever's. It's a very kind of clear route. I've got nothing against that at all. And I've taught in a lot of gyms, and I get it, and just I don't think that's a bad thing if that works. As you said, we all get to the same place, and most of us are probably going to feel the same kind of quality of Shavasana, hopefully. In fact, maybe this is getting too political, but said me ever? No. I think it's interesting to look at the states. And I remember, like, as I did like more advanced teacher training, having conversations, because I trained, I guess, with people from Denmark and Sweden and the States, quite a few people in the States. And it was always fascinating to me to hear about the yoga scene, I guess, yoga land, yoga world. And thinking about that in comparison to the UK and in comparison to Norway, it's really interesting, because I think a lot of the West looks to the States because the first place in the West that it went. And so there's a more, I think I remember speaking with Jason Crandall about this, and he was talking about it, the States being almost has like a postmodern approach to yoga, as in there's more like, I thought that was a really interesting way to describe it, because I guess there's, like you said, these different worlds that exist, and maybe they don't meet. There's a kind of gap in between, which is, It's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, and two, it's some I can't remember if I heard, if this was a conversation that I heard in real life or if I read it in one of his books or if I heard it on an interview, but Richard Rosen, it might be in his latest book, where he was talking about how, you know, out like these like yoga as a darshan, as a world view is old. And our experience of, you know, whatever slice of yoga we've received in the West and in the United States is still in its, I mean, we're like super babies. We're teeny babies.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's hard to really not, I mean, like we have a long way to go to see, you know, even how it plays out in toddlerhood. Like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely agree. And I think about that a lot. And I guess the strands, I could really dig in deep here, but like just thinking about the strands and the lineages and why certain things are the way they are, I suppose is a very simplistic way of putting it. But I remember for a few years ago when I first heard of like Kinetic Yoga, the yoga lineage that originates from Africa, and you know, and asking questions to different yoga teachers, different experienced quote unquote yoga teachers, and what they thought about it. And often in the West, it was kind of rejected as a, well, you know, it's only about Patanjali and they don't write about it in these texts, so therefore it doesn't exist. And so I'm kind of constantly thinking like, but, you know, I mean, I know I'm opening up a can of worms here, but I suppose I'm always asking questions and I'm always interested in challenging what I think and trying to be curious and open and learn and be outward in that, and kind of looking at the information that's there, but also taking that, and just like with yoga trainings, hopefully you go outward, you pick up stuff, you learn stuff, and you go back in and hopefully integrate the stuff that sticks. At least that's my experience, the stuff that works, or adapt it to your own mode, I suppose. But yeah, it's a very curious thing. Like, why is it that this particular lineage has, I'm answering my own question because I guess it's about documentation and colonialism, and you know, we can go we can go down that road, and why certain things are held as being the original yoga or not. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. So there's this book that people who listen to this podcast regularly have heard me talk ad nauseum about, called The Hindus by Wendy Doniger. And it was banned in India. And part of what she looks at is sort of how the priestly caste dominated the narrative and really like controlled what, you know, was published and you know, presented to both within the Indian subcontinent and beyond. Like, sort of, they were in charge of what was shown to the world about this practice, and how so much of that, like now what we, even this like glorification of Sanskrit was sort of decided by a certain caste. And even though, you know, the practices themselves are living and lived in different ways all over the place, what was then presented and then sort of carried, you know, this like the colonialism game of telephone, how that made its way out is, you know, it's highly political. And even, you know, within that, there are just so many layers of oppression and
Yeah.
And to know that, and to even acknowledge that sometimes is like, I mean, feels almost dangerous. Not, I mean, not physically dangerous, but like Wendy Doniger's book got banned in India because they didn't want that information out.
Yeah, I think about this stuff a lot and my relationship to yoga and what it is. And for a few years, I really stepped back after moving back from Norway, and I was just trying to redefine for myself, like, what is it that I'm sharing? Because is it yoga? Because I think a lot of people would disagree that this is yoga. Like, what? Yeah. I guess I've just been trying to really decolonize my own mind and in every way, and challenge things and explore things and really kind of start again. But it's really complicated. And of course, there's a lot of, I try and stay out of those Facebook yoga groups. There's quite a few that get really, yeah, they feel a little bit dangerous sometimes when they start talking about caste systems and slavery and yoga and what it is and who owns it and who's allowed to do what. And yeah, I think that the whole paradigm of power and oppression is something that I'm still working through when it comes to yoga and what it is I'm offering. I feel more comfortable using yoga these days because I feel that, I guess, I mean, it always comes back in these discussions to what is the meaning of yoga and, yoked. And then we go to this particular, Sanskrit definition. And yeah, for me, I often tell people that I don't like to tell people what I think yoga is or what it should be, and that it's for them to define, like it's their exploration and their adventure. And it's not for me to say, which I realize can sound a bit ethereal and frustrating, especially if you do to see on your class plan what it is that's going to happen, or define it really clearly. But I'm all for just trying to dismantle oppression again, and to challenge power structures, and to try to be inquisitive and to keep asking questions, especially when you're told not to ask them. That's when you need to ask more. Yeah. And trust yourself as well, because really someone made up these particular postures that are often used in classes. And like you said, that there's a filtration system, and these things kind of get adapted and changed. And the yoga that we read about, even if we look at light on yoga, like how different many of those postures are, for example, compared to what's kind of modern and what's adapted, maybe for safety, maybe just because someone had some ideas about what could be new and exciting to bring in. I don't know, but yeah, to get right with you first and to get clear on how you feel, what's your connection, what's your definition, but also getting information and educating yourself and reading, but also realizing that the things that might be in print are probably someone's filtered that too. So it's like, what do we do about that? Got to try and stay open, I guess.
I love what you said about decolonizing your own mind. And that being such a part of the practice.
Yeah.
It's funny how it's so something that's interesting to me is how different, how we can be in our own process and our own practice and see or observe how that plays out in our own lives, and then also watch what sort of challenges that can present in the classroom. And what I mean by that is, I prefer to ask questions and let the question be the thing that creates whatever structure that we're finding. And sometimes I can tell, because either people will say straight to my face, or I can just see in their face or whatever, that is then perceived as a lack of competence. And so then, like, trust in the process being really like everything.
Massive. Huge. Like, you nailed it. That's it. Let's frame this one. That's a tweetable. I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Trust is so huge. And, 10 years ago, I wish I had developed more of that in myself and what I was trying to share and what I was trying to do, rather than feeling completely, I guess, that my challenges and experience early on in my yoga career came because of that lack of trust. I didn't have what I felt was like a safe network. I didn't feel safe where I was living. Like, I didn't really feel at home in many ways. There was a language barrier, cultural barriers, and being told that I'm sorry to kind of wind my way back around to what we were talking about earlier, but I remember someone who was observing my yoga class, my boss at the time, said to me in my review, when she watched my class, and during the class, she was kind of jumping up and down whilst we were doing kind of quite restorative stuff. She kind of stand up, really scribble notes furiously, and then get back down. So the whole class was kind of just watching her performance. And after the class, she said, "Dionne, you smile too much. You're too kind. Norwegians don't like that. You've got to be strict with them. You've got to really push them, hold them longer in planks, make them work, make them strong." And I was like, one of the very first classes that I taught, and someone said that. And I think the worst thing she said was, people will think you're fake. And that for me was so devastating, because to really feel that what you're offering is an amalgamation of something that I suppose that I don't really know how to say it. It felt very, very painful, because I just wanted to create a space where people could feel safe and accepted, and that was real, and not trying to be ambiguous in the teaching, but trying to be really clear. And and of course I can ask questions about my ego as well, being kind of hurt that, oh, she really hated my class. Okay. But I think in that situation, I've gone off on a tangent, I'm really sorry, but I really wish that early on in my career I had trusted myself and what I was trying to share with people, and what kind of space I wanted to hold, and not kind of felt rocked. I felt like I'd completely come off the tracks, and I just didn't trust myself at all. And I think so many new yoga teachers go through that as well, like turning up and you feel you have that imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing? What am I actually, how can I do this thing? This is impossible. And it is a bit bizarre, really, because really teaching a yoga class is kind of based on the British Army doing exercises in India that has, worked its way back to the West, and now I don't know, it's all bizarre and interesting. But yeah, trust is so very important. And yeah, to do that kind of work, I think, is the real yoga, you know, like to really go inward and explore that is, it's so valuable, so challenging, but worth it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. So now are you half-time in Bergen and half-time in Bright? Are you, or maybe not quite half, or what's yours?
Yeah. just kind of dancing around, and yeah, I'm still in Bergen quite a bit. I'm going to be in Norway, Bergen and Oslo quite a bit in the autumn. But yeah, I'm based between there and the UK mostly, and mostly online. So a lot of my work is online, and I feel really grateful for that and the flexibility of that, and being able to connect still to those amazing people that I met in Norway, and also to work and in the UK as well, and build community here, and also feel connected to a global community, because, you know, that's how I met you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, internet. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you travel a lot with your work, or do you find you're based mostly in?
It kind of it goes in phases and waves. There was like 2015, 2016, I traveled a lot. And we'll see what happens once this new one arrives, how that all plays out. You know, my family and I like to travel a lot too. And so that is really nice to kind of, you know, have that be part of our sort of family practice experience. But yeah, I also just love being able to really connect with people wherever we are in the world. And there's some, I mean, it's as you know, like it's a real connection, and it's it feels important to, you know, hold space for each other no matter where we are and how frequently or infrequently we can make those points of contact. But it feels good. Yeah. I was just noticing that you have a retreat coming up, and that you have 2 spots left. Where is that one happening?
Oh yeah, that's where I am now, in Brighton, by the seaside.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what's going to happen and what's going to go down at the retreat.
Oh, I just love this retreat so much. It's kind of, we basically rent this warehouse space in the center of Brighton city center, which is kind of maybe a bit of a bizarre idea about what a retreat should be, which is obviously right up my street anyway. So it's it's in a really vibrant part of Brighton called the North Lane. There's a lot of independent places around there, and there's a vibe there. And so we rent space, and in the complex is where, like, people sleep upstairs, and then we have the yoga downstairs, but also we have breakfast, and we make a spread for lunch, and lots of really fun concoctions. And we tend to, in the summer, have more of a focus on going deep in the mornings, and then just leaving the afternoons open to have adventures, be it bike rides under the cliffs, or swims, or creative activities and so on. But yeah, so we tend to go deep with the yoga and meditation and kind of hopefully carry it through the day and in our fun times. And yeah, there's a lot of food. I love food, so it's very important, and a lot of time for connection. And there's always really amazing people who join us, so it's quite an international crowd, which is lovely. So yeah, I feel really grateful to do that. Yeah, here in Brighton. Yeah.
I feel like I remember reading, it might have been on your blog, like after you did your first maybe it was your first retreat, and you and your partner had done all the cooking.
Oh my God.
Did that happen, or did I dream that?
Yeah, we did. That was in Norway, right?
Yes, and that was so has inspired me for forever. Like I have always, because of that, since then done at least some of the food prep for, any of the like workshops and there's something magical about the food.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. My mum will tell you, I've always loved my food. So yeah, I feel really grateful. My partner and I, we've been running a lot of these retreats and workshops together, and they mostly involve food in some capacity, as well as yoga and music. He's a musician, so we collaborate on stuff together as well. And yeah, we just love to share like things that we're exploring and discovering, not in a, I suppose, in a way that I feel frightened by. That is, you should eat this and drink this green juice, and this is what is healthy and this is not, because I haven't got time for that. I think eat what you like, do whatever you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anyone. But when it comes to food, I don't have any rules other than it tastes good. But if yeah, I guess I am interested in nutrition, but also trying to keep an open mind with that as well. It's like, just like yoga, like what works for you and your body and your state, like your emotional state, your mental state, what kind of vibe you want. Like, I think it's much more interesting to adapt these things to your individual needs. So with food, what's calling you, what's feeling good to eat for you, what's helping you feel great, and also what's not, and what's delicious, obviously. So yeah, we spend a lot of time cooking and researching different recipes, and obviously tasting a lot of things so that we can share it with people on retreats and workshops. The Norway retreat, that first one, was monster. We had 2 weekends in a row, and I think 20 people each weekend. So cooking for 22 people. One of my friends, who lives in California, she lives in Oakland, and she came over for the second weekend, and she was helping us like chop onions, and it was bonkers with these giant vats of food. And we still laugh about it now, like how bizarre it was just cooking on that kind of grand scale. But it was an experience and a lot of fun. And yeah, it's so nice to be able to incorporate many different things, food and music and yoga, and it's all yoga, to me at least. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I could just talk to you all day.
Yeah, same.
I want to have you back on the show.
Oh, babes, anytime.
Thank you so much for sharing, and for sharing your time and your space and your heart, and for everything that you do.
Thank you, babes. Thanks for holding this space, just to have these conversations. It's so precious, earnestly precious. Yeah. So thank you for that, and all the work that you do, like as a human being on this planet, living your life and raising babes, and existing and creating, and yeah, it's wonderful.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. Complete show notes are available at yokedpodcast.com. Please feel free to connect by emailing me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Today's episode is made possible by the Wildcat Yoga Club, our online yoga community. The clubhouse contains an ever-expanding library of audio and video practices, plus lectures, tutorials, and video Q&A sessions, plus monthly online workshops in meditation, active listening, and embodied voice. Membership also includes discounts on all courses, retreats, and products in the Sunrose Yoga shop. All of this for $15 a month or $150 per year. Connect with the yoga of real life by visiting www.wildcatyogaclub.com. Thanks.